I always thought that GWAR's big things were being super underground, but having little push-throughs into the mainstream. So people will always say, like, oh, GWAR, you mean that band that's Beavis and Butthead's favorite band, you know? Or, you know, Empire Records or the Grammys. You know, we've been nominated for 3 Grammys. So for me, it's those little things where the mainstream, because we haven't ever tried to really be mainstream. I mean, we've tried a little bit. But we've tried to retain our ethos, which is, you know, do it yourself and do what you want. And those little breakthrough moments where the mainstream has acknowledged, like, wow, this thing's going on and this thing's pretty weird. You know, Mystery Date, Empire Records, Beavis and Butthead, and 3 Grammy nominations, you know.
Jerry Springer.
Jerry Springer, right, exactly. So when people, you know, you can't buy a house with street cred, but, you know, that's all GWAR has is street cred. We have no money, but we have a lot of credibility, you know. People try to reference us to get cool points, people with money, and I'm like, no, like, give us money. Like, we have cool, we're cool, we're just broke. I'm Bob Gorman. I play a variety of different roles. I'm the human slave to Bonesnapper, the cave troll. I'm also one of the 2 main art directors.
I am Michael Derks. I've been Balsac's personal guitar assistant for the past 30 plus years, and I'm one of the composers, and I don't have a department really. I just am. Oh, actually, I'm the president of Slave Pit Incorporated. My name is... I'm obviously a figurehead president.
Yeah, we're all presidents.
I'm Brad Roberts, and I'm definitely the slave of Jizmak Da Gusha, the drummer of GWAR. I handle certain other duties at Slave Pit Incorporated, treasurer, and I do a lot of the merchandise department work, and pretty much any piece of paper that needs to get signed or comes through the mail, I'm on that too.
I am Michael Bishop. I am the human slave of Blothar, the berserker of GWAR. I am the lead singer right now, involved in the music creation processes of GWAR. And this is the oral history of GWAR. I first joined GWAR when I was in high school in the late 80s, I guess 87 or something like that. Maybe even, I don't know, Bobby would probably know, but maybe before that. But then 87 is when we started, actually, that's the year I graduated, and we started touring a lot more. And I was, you know, I had a little hardcore band in Richmond. I was a fan of Death Piggy, who was the sort of pre-GWAR band led by Dave Brockie. And I was also a fan of White Cross, which is a Richmond punk band, The Alternatives, which was a Richmond punk band, and all of those folks were involved in the early days of GWAR. And it was a real honor to me. They were older than me by a little bit, I guess like 4 to 6 years. It was an honor for me to be involved and have the opportunity to be involved when Dave Brockie decided that he was going to make the band into a real sort of touring entity. And prior to that, GWAR had sort of been like a big performance project, like an art project thing that would do shows, right? Like, and it was a band, but it was also like there was so much involved that it really was almost like an installation when they played in a club or something. Like, you know, it wasn't something that we could really, that I think people conceived as being something that went out on the road and toured and did things like that. You know, but Dave decided to make a transition and make it more viable as a performing act. And so he brought in some new musicians that actually kind of turned out to be the exact opposite of the original musicians that he had in GWAR. I've never understood why he picked the people he picked, but he did. And I was very happy to be a part of it.
I joined in 1989, and it was Bishop who gave me a call. I was in, you know, obviously a high school band that played downtown Richmond, places like Rockets and Jade Elephant, things like that. There's these clubs near the college, VCU. And Mike gave me a call, and my band had just broken up. My band was Rosebud. And we had just broken up, and I was just working a job. for about 5 or 6 months and not playing with any one particular group of people. And Mike gave me a call to try out with GWAR, and they had a few other people that were trying out as well. I think they had just gotten back from a U.S. tour where, and Bob will probably have better specifics, but the drummer kind of went crazy early on in the tour, and they got Jim Thompson, the drummer for the Alternatives, to sort of fill in on this U.S. tour. And when they got back, they knew Jim wasn't going to be a part of the band because I think he had the Alternatives was still going. So they were looking for drummers. So they gave me a call, and I tried out with a few folks in the same week. I think one of them was Ed Trask, who would later go on to be in Mike Bishop's band, Keepone, after he left GWAR. And then the other guy was, and also Ed would go on to be in Avail. I knew about GWAR, but I hadn't really been able to see GWAR up to that point. The first show that I saw of GWAR, I was playing in GWAR. I thought it was such a cool, creative band. I'd never seen anything, like it, definitely from the playing aspect. And they had really challenging songs that, for me at that time. And I thought the music was going in a really cool direction. And, it just seemed like the extension of what I really wanted to do that I couldn't do with my high school band.
I had just moved to Richmond to go to Virginia Commonwealth University. I somehow managed to get into the music department, although I couldn't read music or play any keyboards at the time. I baked my way in. Or actually, I guess VCU was probably low enough on the totem pole that they were desperate for students back then. But so I had decided I was going to be a music composition major, even though I didn't really have the discipline or the skill to be one, but they let me into the music program. But I'd been jamming with Mike Bishop, and we were just, occasionally we would get together and play, but Mike was doing GWAR, and I remember he played me the first album, Hello. I was less than impressed by it, and I remember how crestfallen he was when he played me that album, and my reaction was not quite what he was hoping for.
Nobody's was. It was terrible. A trauma I'll never forget.
But then they kicked out their original guitarist, Steve Douglas, and I think Brockie was kind of afraid that Bishop was going to get tired of doing this silly band and might run off and go start a band with me, so he figured he'd cut that off by getting me to join the band. But it was weird because I was definitely not coming from the same metal, hard rock, punk background. I was like, an alternative music guy, and the band I was playing in before GWAR, like instead of having guitar solos, I would take a little boombox and play spoken word interviews with porn stars through a microphone and run it through a delay pedal. So that was my version of a lead. So I had no idea what I mean, I knew what punk rock was, but I didn't know anything about metal. And we were trying to be this metal band. I mean, no one back then really thought GWAR was metal. We were making fun of metal. I think Bishop had the closest thing to a metal background, coming from a band called The Guilty in high school, which was actually one of the most respected metal bands in Richmond at the time. Nobody knew about Beefcake. He was Beefcake before he was Beefcake in GWAR. That's where the name came from. It was his high school
My punk name, street name.
I didn't think it was great. But now I love it. I think it's hilarious, and the songs are amazing. I think just as a young kid, I was knowing how good Mike was, I expected to be more blown away by it.
There's a little bit of a, you have to understand some prehistory of GWAR to understand that, which is that we were all real fans of the people that had been musicians before Dave put together this kind of the band The Alternatives, who were on SST, and their versions of those songs, I think, were what we carried in our heads, and even me too. And I tried to, I was just a really young guy, and it was kind of hard for me to effect that kind of change in the music, right? Like I was just sort of holding on by my fingernails, hoping that I wasn't going to, get kicked out of this thing or whatever. So,
Yeah, Brockie had a really cool way. If you look at all of us, he got the young blood because they were 4 to 6 years older than all of us, and he really did get the young blood players to keep it going. So he wouldn't have to deal with his friends that are the same age as him, and he could tell us what to do.
I think he had just worked through all the older people, and they were already sick of him, or he'd already fired them all. That's what it was.
Yeah, totally.
I was friends from, the Gray Street, from being a street kid with Mike Bishop. So he got me in the band too, basically. He introduced me. At that point, GWAR was really far more of an art-driven band. I think everyone will agree with me. And Dave was solidifying the musical lineup. Before that, it was like the artists were GWAR, and the musicians were almost like just every show was different. Every GWAR show I saw before that, it was a different group of musicians. There might be one or two of the same, but it was always this sort of ever-changing cast of musicians. And I think, like Bishop said, once he decided we're going to be this touring entity, he started locking, all the guys in this interview down to be like real solid touring players. I was real disappointed with art school. I liked the Richmond music scene, but I started art school and I was really disappointed with how I thought it was pretty square. And I really liked the energy of like punk shows and these performance art stuff I was seeing. And GWAR really fit into that. But I had a real problem getting in because, GWAR was an art-driven band, and so there were all the guys that started that, and they wanted people to help, but they didn't want any competition. So I just came in to help, and I wanted to learn how to make stuff. So Bishop was like, I was complaining to Mike at this coffee shop we hung out at the Village. I was complaining about art school, and he was like, you should come to the Slave Pit. And Don was there. Don was the art director, kind of the art director at the time. Don Draculus, who played Sleazy P. Martini, still does. He was like, yeah, come and help me make some stuff. And so I went and started making stuff, and there was a show a week later on campus. And, back then there was always a rotating cast, so they needed somebody to get their head cut off. And I did that for years because I'm short. So it's always better for a short guy to play a decap because it sells it a little better. We got a guy at the time who was like 6 feet tall, and if he played a decap, it was just embarrassing. It was so ridiculous. So I played a decap, and it was one of Derks' first shows too. And so I was just a satellite member for probably 2 years. I was trying to join, but, there were so many flaky people hanging around. They didn't want to just say, oh, yeah, you're cool. Go on tour with us, because they didn't want someone to have a meltdown or. So after 2 years, I decided to quit art school, and I went to Dave and said, hey, I want to join the band permanently. And Scumdogs was coming out. We were going to go on tour for that. And Dave was like, yeah, no problem. So it took me like 2 years to kind of worm my way into the band. But yeah, it was right after Hello, between Hello and Scumdogs. Kind of the same time as, this whole group right here. A lot of the characters had already been created when I got there. We would write a new show, and the way it still works to this day is it's a very organic process where people just start talking about something they came up with on their own and throwing it out there and saying, I got this crazy idea. And then people start saying, oh, well, we could, he could fight this character, or he could actually be this, which represents this. And everyone sort of, jumps in, and then, a musician will say, well, I got a riff, and, that could be a country song, because that character's kind of like sort of a redneck. It's real organic. It just starts rolling. And things that we can usually shoehorn almost any idea in to fit in GWAR, because it's so loose.
I was trying to figure out what metal was. I figured if we were parodying it, but actually no, I take that back. I wasn't trying to figure it out at all. I kind of hated metal at that point, and I decided I was never going to listen to Metallica or Slayer or anything. I made the point of I would refuse. I would walk out of the room if someone was playing a Slayer album. But on the first album, that one of the riffs I wrote, it's like, okay, I think I know what metal is from from just hearing it in the background. And I know that Public Enemy had sampled Slayer and She Watched Planet Zero, so I'm gonna rip off that riff from Public Enemy, which I know is a Slayer riff, so that must be metal. So that's how I like wrote in Love Surgery. There's a riff that's like actually sounds like a legitimate metal riff, but that was me not knowing anything about metal and stealing from a rap band.
What I would call the Scumdogs lineup, right? The lineup that got put together out of the initial Hello lineup. From my viewpoint, having somebody in the band that didn't really know that much about metal, to me, because I was more attracted towards like things like the Replacements or Husker Du or the Minutemen, right? Like, I just enjoyed having musicians, and both in the case of both Mike and Brad, musicians that I thought didn't have a metal background, that had like, so I mean, I think that was part of wanting to play with those guys, because, the desire to have GWAR be original, like just sound different and bring in different influences, because I knew that if they could understand these other kinds of music, then they could certainly understand metal, right? It's not that hard. It's like, I think it's hard to do right, to do well, just like a lot of musics are. But
insane amount of proficiency to be a great metal player, but but wasn't one of my goals. I didn't want to be that guitarist that was super proficient and played 20 hours a day to be able to pull off those riffs. I was more interested in sounds and and it was definitely us reinterpreting metal from our nerdy monster eyes.
Right.
Yeah, when we were working on Scumdogs, I think I was only a part of working on the writing process in 3 songs: Salamanizer, Maggots, and Sick of You. And most of that record had been written somewhere in the time between Hello and when we were going to record Scumdogs. And with the new lineup of players, we just sort of reinvented the songs that they already had. And they were a little bit of a departure from Hello. Like Hello was messy and sloppy and really punky sounded and had a lot of great anthems. But Scumdogs, my goal was to just tighten that band up, and play in time and then maybe throw in a little double bass here or there when you could use it rhythmically. And I always thought GWAR was a punk band. I mean, that's the stuff that we were really listening to. And like Mike said, we really did want to be different. And when I heard most of that record, they were showing it to me, the songs they had written, it didn't sound like metal to me. It just sounded like really good, unique songs. So I wanted to just add to that and try to keep the tempo a little better than on Hello, because it was all over the place.
I remember us playing it kind of straight, like Barbarians from Outer Space. Kind of like Spinal Tap. We're the greatest thing you've ever seen. I remember going like, oh, these costumes aren't too great, but they're good enough, and they're great in their own way, and their simplicity and the fact that they work every night. And I remember we'd play like the Pyramid, New York City, and there'd be people screaming like, I can't believe it! I can't believe it! Like it was the greatest thing they'd ever seen, and I thought it was great for a completely different reason. It was great because it felt great and it was fun. But it wasn't great. It was pretty sloppy and crappy. And so I never could tell if we had an effect on people that I remember very strongly in small clubs was just, I think it was almost like, oh my God, they're doing it. That's something we've always wanted to see, but no one really did it because, they couldn't afford to do it right. So they just didn't bother to do it. But, that's the thing that I definitely learned from Hunter and Chuck and those guys was the guys that started the art department were like, well, it doesn't matter. Like, just do it. And then if it breaks, do it different next time. And, we want to have a giant butt on stage that shoot. That's how we defeat our enemy. A giant butt comes out and just shoots diarrhea on him. And that's how the show ends, like how will we make a big butt? I don't know. Let's try it with cardboard. Let's try it with couch cushions. Let's try it with glue. So yeah, I mean, we tried to sell it as straight and as rock and roll and as like what everything we were making fun of. We're the greatest band we're Antarctica's #1 band.
My parents were really religious people, and very Southern grew up in it's where I learned how to do music. It was very, very sort of conservative Christian church. So, you know, I mean, but my mother was very supportive. And I remember she saw it the first time she came to a GWAR show. And her reaction was, I think it's so creative, but why does it have to be so nasty? Right? Like she didn't understand, like, you know, she thought it was really great that we had all the outfits and all, and it was a lot of creative energy. But I mean, they were just generally supportive. They were never super hypercritical. And my father, you know, maybe like just the whole thing was just bullshit to him. It's like, you know what? I wasn't playing country music, so I was never going to make any money. So I might as well just give it up, you know.
My dad was a psychology professor at William and Mary who actually specialized in the psychology of humor. And my parents would never come to a show. They saw it and they was like, oh, that's amazing, but there's no way we were ever going to come see you. But my dad would use GWAR as source material in his class as an example of chaotic, aggressive humor. He's very proud to say, yes, this is my son.
Yeah, we had a lot of support. I thought my parents were supportive. They were just like, oh, cool, you're doing something you love. And, you know, my dad would always bug, you got to make money, though. You got to make money. My mom was just like, always, keep doing it. You're having fun. It's great. I think that's probably really important for all the guys sitting here. They probably had a lot of support from their parents. So that's why we're still doing it. You know, if you'd have been really beaten down as a kid, you probably wouldn't last this long in something like GWAR. It's tough. It's the most fun you'll ever have trying to not work.
My mom was always pretty concerned, but I wasn't getting arrested or anything. But when Dave got arrested, and I nearly got arrested during the cuttlefish incident, and that made national news. I remember I was on tour and I called home, and that's when, you know, I started getting a little more pushback because my mom, before that, had figured, oh, you're making a living, you're doing something. I sheltered her from it because she was very religious too, and I knew she would not care for, you know, alien dicks and priest asses. So
the incident where we were arrested in in North Carolina, and what town was that in, guys? That was
Charlotte.
Charlotte.
We weren't all arrested, just Dave.
Yeah. We weren't all arrested, just Dave. But it was that was an interesting. You know, what I remember is that we were on stage. Look outside. We see into the crowd. You could see a line of sort of, there was something going on in the back, right? Where there was like people coming into the back. And then all of a sudden up on stage, like there were these dudes that were basically dressed like Barney Miller, you know, like sweaty sort of tie wearing shirt sleeve guys, like saying like, hey, stop it, come here, you know? And we're like, who are these clowns? Like, get these guys off the stage, you know? But like, then they started flashing badges and guns. I mean, like the guy opened his shirt.
We played the whole show because I remember after the show is when they came backstage, and the reason why Dave got arrested and I didn't was because, so it was for simulated rape and I was the priest. I had taken my fake butt off because I had to play like two other characters. Dave took his shoulder pad and mask off. He was still wearing his dick when they got backstage. So they basically, if he hadn't had it on, I think they could have made the case like, oh, that guy that was wearing it left, you know. But they basically caught him red-handed. And I remember we were laughing with him, and we thought it was kind of a joke. He took it off, and I remember there was one bad cop and there was the good cop. The one guy was kind of palling around with us, and the bad cop was so sickened by it, he wouldn't pick up the cuttlefish. He took a stick, and he had a 5-gallon bucket, and he picked it up with a stick and like put it into the 5-gallon bucket, like, ugh, you know. And we were still thinking some kind of joke, you know, because we were just undressing and we just gotten off stage. So when they were like, "No, we're arresting you," we're all like, "What?" Like, no,
yeah.
Like, for what? You know, it didn't
Brockie
seem.
was called Red Wiener.
Yeah.
Right as the Scumdogs record, we were working on that record. That was the breakout record. It's still hailed as sort of the classic quintessential GWAR album. And at that time, the climate, there were a lot of record labels fighting over GWAR. And so I thought, well, I was like, this is great. You know, I just got in a band that's actually, there's like 4 labels trying to sign this band and get them out there. Here's my start in the music industry. So I thought that was one point when that record came out. It was really important for GWAR. It kind of launched GWAR in a way. And that I can only speak to that because that's when I sort of was inserted in the band. I mean, I'm sure there were other things before that were important as well to get them to that point. But that was the one thing that broke kind of GWAR was the release of that album and all those labels fighting over them for it too. So that created a lot of awareness in the music industry that GWAR was for real and it was, you know, was going to do something. On This Toilet Earth, we had a song on that record called Baby Dick Fuck. When we turned that in to listen, for Metal Blade to listen to that, they were subsidized by Warner Brothers Records, right? So Warner Brothers would do the distribution for Metal Blade at that point. So they came back to us and were just like, Warner Brothers isn't going to distribute this record with this song on it. And we were just like, well, so what? We want the song on it. You know, so we kind of fought to keep the song on the record and kind of forced Metal Blade's hand to, at that time, I think they were going to sort of break away from the Warner Brothers umbrella. You know, they were like the metal version of, you know, the metal subsidiary of Warner Brothers. So we made them sort of go get another distribution deal, even though at the time, and they really kind of stood up for us in that way. And I really didn't think they would. I thought we were just going to have to take the song off the record. But, you know, they was like, no. And then we also thought, too, that, well, hey, if they're telling us to take a song off of a record because of its content, I mean, we have the explicit lyric stickers, you know, what's the big deal? Then we just thought further, like, oh, the next time we do a record, they're going to tell us what kind of songs to write, not just take the songs we've already written and put a big red X through them. They're going to be like, you guys should do more like this. And nobody in GWAR wanted to hear any of that. So it was our way of kind of nipping our that in the bud so we could just retain all of our creative exactly the way we wanted to do it.
I really think that Baby Dick Fuck thing, and I still don't know how I feel about it because, you know, at this point where we're still going and we seem to be doing pretty fine, I think we did the right thing. But I remember at the time, a couple of choices that we made artistically really led to more of the artists leaving. And like, you know, what you can do with more money is make more art, you know? And because we didn't get that, you know, Metal Blade did seem to lose a little interest in us and things, you know, a lot of the artists, the main guys that were my mentors, you know, ended up leaving because there just wasn't enough money coming around to employ us all the time. And so kind of one of our dreams was to have Slave Pit be, you know, the punk rock Disney, you know, comic books, movies, you know, albums were the one thing that were supposed to make the money to propel all the other things. And so, you know, that didn't really happen. And that Baby Dick Fuck thing was part of it. And I still, like I said, I don't know if we did the right thing or not. I mean, we're still going, and so clearly it didn't destroy us, but it changed things radically. I remember a couple of things, the movie we made, the 35 millimeter movie we made at that time did not get distributed. Metal Blade didn't distribute it to theaters. They didn't know what to do with it. And I just remember the fallout from that was there was a dark period of GWAR that started at that point. And we came out of it, as we always do. But I think that was a real pivotal thing. And I don't know if we made the right decision or not. But that was a big risk we took, not going with Warner Brothers. Because the other thing is, that song was taken off the album anyway. When it got re-released, it got taken off anyway, and we lost the Warner Brothers distribution.
GWAR seemed on the verge of destruction. It was like a race car that was driving so fast, you thought all of the bolts and something was going to fly off of it, and it would just be over. And that seemed to happen every couple of years with different people shifting around. And I remember we were in pretty bad financial shape. Bob had left and gone to New York to do some art stuff. Matt, the other artist, McGuire in the band, he had left to go to Atlanta. We were finished with our Metal Blade. We fulfilled all the Metal Blade contracts. This is about 2000, 99, 2000. And we were trying to figure out, what does GWAR still have life? What are we going to do? In that period, me and Dave Brockie and Mike Derks, we did a side project called the Dave Brockie Experience. We did 2 records with that while we were trying to find new management, find another record deal. We just thought it still had life. We know we're going to do it again. We know we're going to get the band back together.
That's what GWAR has kind of done. Has been the main thing about us, is we've been able to have rebirth and kind of reestablish ourselves and kind of reform. And what I think of as the first birth would be the Schaefer Court show, which was kind of the first big GWAR show. That's where I first saw them. And that was like kind of a culmination of years of these guys just making stuff in this abandoned milk bottle and just building costumes. And then they actually put together this thing where there were hundreds of people there. And it was like, wow, this is actually a big show. And that kind of, for me, that seemed like the birth of GWAR. Violence Has Arrived, that was another big rebirth where we got everybody back together and we put together basically a new band. People see that as like the beginning of the GWAR as a serious metal band. Then, you know, we had the tragedy when Cory died, and that was hard to just pick up and keep going. And then we got hit again with Dave. But I think fucking the last album we did, Blood of Gods, was definitely a rebirth. You know, it's like, it's what we've been doing our whole careers, like reinventing and keeping GWAR going.
The loss of Dave was huge, but what was significant, I think, is the record, being able to sort of make that record after that loss is a big achievement for the band, and a big sort of moment in the band's history. So I mean, both losing Dave and being able to sort of survive that loss.
Yeah, and figuring out that we can still do GWAR without Dave. I mean, that's the thing I'm most proud about Blood of Gods. It still feels like a GWAR album. And we didn't know if that was possible, you know, without Dave.
You shouldn't underestimate that statement, right? Like, we didn't know if it was possible, right? Like, I mean, and we had to push really, really hard to make that happen. I think we did do that. And it was, you know, like listening back to that record and having it sound like a GWAR album, feeling like it was a GWAR album, you know, being able to, you know, and we had help, man. I mean, like there were people that were supporting us in that, that I don't think we would have been able to do it without, but we did.
Yeah, I felt there was a sense of duty. You know, Dave had always clowned around in interviews that GWAR was going to live forever, you know, well after all of us. But I sort of took that seriously, you know, like I thought we had to make the record after Dave. And lucky for us, you get an original member of GWAR, Mike Bishop, to come back to the band. You know, that's probably the only way any of the GWAR fans would have ever respected us. I think we did it sort of the right way in that respect, because if you just threw another guy in the Oderus suit or just got some other random singer from somewhere, from another popular band or something, I don't think the fans that we have would have respected that at all.
Right after Dave died, and we had a couple of big meetings where we were thinking, what were we going to do? Well, number one, we were going to have a funeral, and we were going to have a private one and a public one and things like that. And as Bishop started coming back in, personally, we were all just trying to do the right thing for our friend, but it was working the way GWAR always works. It was organic. It was nothing being forced. It was just like, oh, well, we'll do a barbecue for the fans, and Bishop will sing the Brockie songs, and then everyone else will sing a song. And it was just sort of this collaborative where we were trying to do the right thing for ourselves and for the fans. And I didn't even think we were going to do anything beyond that, personally, because that's all we were concerned about. But as it happened, and as we got all this support from the fans, we realized that we were doing the right thing. Because if the fans had, you know, really expressed a different kind of reaction to it, I think we would have known, like, no, we don't want to do this. Because then Riot Fest invited us to play there, and we did that, and that was just bonkers how well people responded to that. For me personally, if it hadn't been right, I wasn't going to do it.
GWAR's not the mentors, right? It's not, we're not doing
it's not
things.
Offensive for just offensive sake.
Yeah.
Deeper.
and you know, we're trying to do something that has some meaning, and that's a lot of fun, but that you know, is not just like sort of gratuitous, you know, even though it is as gratuitous as could possibly be imagined, right? The humor and the psychology of GWAR is pretty complicated. Right after I came back to the band, and I think that it was really Dave dying, we never got a ton of resistance from people. I mean, there were people who looked at GWAR and said, all right, that's dumb, or dismissed it because it was theatrical and not serious musically, you know, or there was like, you know, but even weirdly, like, and I don't know whether this has to do with race or what, but like, you know, I mean, even during the Two Live Crew era, when people were really cracking down on hip hop acts, they weren't messing with us that much. You know what I mean? It's like they kind of were at times, but not at the level that they seem to be going after hip hop. You know, so it's like, I think GWAR just was viewed as kind of less of a threat because it was less. I don't know. I mean, maybe because it was white. You know, maybe because it was like raced in some way. I don't know, but I know that GWAR sort of escaped that kind of those kinds of attacks, although we were swept up in some of the sort of PMRC controversies. But then, you know, later on, after Dave's death, it really looked like people started looking at GWAR in an artistic way as acts of performance and art, and valuing it in that way. And I'm talking about the sort of the marks of high culture, right? And I think that reflects a change in the sort of halls of high culture, where they're looking at having a broader view about, you know, and a more inclusive view about what art is. And GWAR began to be included in those conversations.
I think a lot of the reason that we didn't get the backlash that rap acts did is because our messages were cloaked in humor. It's a lot easier to get these disturbing lessons out there if people are laughing with you instead of it just being shocking and violent. And
yeah. And humor was part of the reason we were doing it too. I mean, or it was the reason we were doing it.
I had a conversation with my aunt, kind of going back to what we were talking before. I'd forgotten about this, but you know, she had seen a video and she was concerned about me, and she was real open-minded, kind of hippie lady, but she was like, it's just so negative. And I said, well, you know, through that negativity, you know, we bring things that we actually care about to light. And she was like, well, have you seen me? How is that anything good? Where you're like, you know, you're saying like abduct children and like eat them. And we're like, well, we're bringing to light that that's happening. Like, you know, by us saying, do it, like no one that's like saying, you know, you're making a joke about molesting children and you're actually for it. Like no one in their right mind would ever take that seriously, right? They would say like, oh, but that's really happening, you know? So we had a milk carton. We had a whole campaign. We had dancing milk cartons that came out and sang Have You Seen Me on stage, and, you know, things like that. And through that negativity, I think it's a very punk way of looking at art. It's like showing the most negative aspects to bring it to light and sort of ridiculing it.
It's just a gross parody of American culture. It's like, we didn't create this stuff. It already exists. We're just doing it in a really overblown cartoonish way, like Bob said, just to shed some light on it. Like, hey, look what you guys are doing. Like, and that's kind of GWAR's whole shtick, is that the human beings are the worst thing that ever happened to the planet, and they must be eradicated.
We're more similar to SNL or Monty Python than Slayer, and I just want people, you know, because I think people more know that now than they did before, but I want to make sure more people know that, because the way we work is not a way people tend to work anymore. You know, it's Rob Zombie coming up with all the ideas, putting some money behind it, and then making it all happen. We all come up with it together, and that's so much harder, but it's so much better. People don't work that way because it's just too hard. We're very leftist, you know, the eternal meeting. I mean, it's just sickening how many meetings we have, but you know, that's who we are. And so when people find that out, people that don't like us tend to like us because of that, because that is so unique and unusual. And when Dave died, And the book came out, and we continued to go. People said, well, you know, how do you justify going on without any original members? And I'm like, SNL. Different cast, same thing. You know what SNL is. It's always the same, always different people. That's GWAR, you know. It's an ethos that I think from the guys that started this in a cold, you know, abandoned building in Richmond to now, it's pretty much the same group. Nobody's left from then, but we do things the exact same way, just lefty all the way, you know. Meetings about everything, distribution of power. So I'd like that to be remembered.
I want it to be remembered for not just being a band. I mean, GWAR's so much more than a band. GWAR's got, through over the years, it's got great artists and musicians that have come together to create something unique. There's nothing like it. And I don't think there ever will be anything like GWAR again, at least not the way GWAR has lasted and formulated. And it's been long enough now, I can already see, you know, that GWAR will be remembered sort of how I envisioned it, you know, even after I'm out of it. Because to now you can get pulled over by a police officer and that'll come up and you'll be like, GWAR, I used to listen to you guys in college. Or it's a soccer mom at making breakfast with her kids and she's like, oh, I know about GWAR. I remember Empire Records.
I think it'd be cool if people would recognize the hand we've played in shaping American humor. I think that the landscape of what's acceptable in humor nowadays, definitely we had something to do with that. And when you see shows like, I don't know, just everything now is like so offensive and wouldn't have been allowed before we were a band. You know, like shows like Always Sunny in Philadelphia, you know, you can't have a sitcom about brother and sister smoking crack. And it's like, and the cartoons, but even what kids are watching, you know, it's all, you can see our hand in it.
I would want GWAR to be remembered as a pretty serious critique of modernity that manages to be fun, right? You know, and I know there's some question about like the efficacy of satire and political humor, but I think GWAR does it well and does it right, and that, you know, we are a band that, in my view, challenges rather than replicates or reaffirms sort of power differential, you know, and I think it's important. I think it's that we do that type of expression is valuable, and it's worth protecting, and it's worth remembering. I think that's what GWAR has managed to do.
We've made a lot of mistakes with a lot of money, you know, in the past, and we make a lot less money now, but we do a lot more with it, and we're able to make it more sustainable. So, I mean, if we could buy our own building, for me, just so we had more the ability to, you know, the development is just so crazy right now in America. It's just impossible to find a warehouse. But just so we felt a little more stable to continue, because I think that's just what. But I mean, the bar, you know. The GWAR bar, you know, that's Mike's project, but just things like that, things that can sustain us forever, that can keep going, so we can keep doing the cool stuff, you know. I just say more of the same, quite frankly.
Trying to make that a more clear transition into what Bobby is talking about, I think, even though I don't think we've even really framed it that way to ourselves, or GWAR as a sort of writing and comedy and content creation in that way, using the framework of this crazy rock band of aliens from outer space. Like, I think we're moving in that direction in a much more solid way, and we've been put in that position to really, because this pandemic has refocused our creativity and our outlet for it, right? Like, you know, it's kind of, even in GWAR, it's kind of easy to get into the idea of, like, all right, well, let's go write some rock songs and let's go do, you know what I mean? Like, we can't really do that. I mean, we can write them, but we can't sort of throw all of our energy into like going down into a room and playing together as musicians. Like, we're having to think about how do we express these ideas using these other mediums, right? And put them together in another way. And I've been really, as always, impressed with the energy and the ability of the people in this band to make that transition and to make art in that way, that new way. So I'm very excited about that. Like, you know, I mean, we're putting together a sort of TV show, or not a TV show, but a live stream show, and you know, just things like that, where GWAR is sort of refocusing the energy of the band. But that said, I still can't wait to get in a room and play music again. You know, so I'm looking